Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on Episode 2 of Spy Family Season 3. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. Oh dear. So I'm not a fan of that opening. I like the visuals well enough, but the music is a bit of a doozy. That aside, last we left off, there was what I believe to be an anime original sequence involving the construction equipment and the excavators, and then following that, we had a Frankie episode, poor guy, he had to deal with Fiona. But all of that is, sort of secondary to what is now the main plot. There is a new disciplinarian in town. And, frankly, shame on that student for smoking on the campus. Like, what are you doing, man? Although it seems like discipline is kind of lacking in Eden Academy writ large. Mr. Henderson's explaining to everyone, like, look, you guys are turning in stuff late. Not very elegant. And that's true, but, something tells me that Anya is making up a sort of a disproportionate amount of late assignments, Like, something tells me that Anya's a bit more of the problem than, the normal distribution curve would suggest. Oh, Anya. She's tempting fate here, because Damien sort of tactfully mentions the idea of Stella stars and Tonitrus bolts. The idea being if you get 8 stars, you are really, really good. And if you get 8 bolts, you are expelled. So I believe Anya at this point in time has one of each. She has a star for her involvement in saving a drowning kid. And she has 1 bolt because she fairly justifiably slugged Damien. He did kind of deserve it, but it was also out of line on Anya's part. It's kind of refreshing to see a school that, doesn't tolerate violence, because, that's normally the case. It's like, hey, it's okay if one student hits another, but if you fight back, ooh, buddy. So, nevertheless, there had to be some punishment meted out, so Anya, she was given a bolt. It's just one. You can survive such a thing. Although, unfortunately, this lady here, she is very, happy to give him out. One wonders, what exactly she had been doing up until now. I get the impression she was on sabbatical or something. I think it's explained eventually. But, in spite of all that, this bodes rather poorly for Anya. Because I feel like, Miss Schlag here, as Henderson put it, she's probably not going to step with 1 bolt per infraction. Or rather, she's not going to stop at like one bolt for a mess of infractions. I feel like she would produce an itemized list, you know? So, this disciplinarian is insinuating that Henderson is soft. And, I mean, maybe she's not entirely wrong, but she is certainly out of line here. Because, like, Henderson, you know, he's in charge of little kids, and, you know, you have to use the carrot and the stick, you know? You can't just, like, punish kids only and relentlessly and expect them to become well-adjusted individuals. You know, you gotta do both here. You have to offer rewards as well as punishments for misbehavior. So, like, here we have it. Like, she was in the hospital for illness. Guess we're not gonna learn any more about that, but it seems to me that it's kind of deserved. You know, already she sort of strikes me as the heinous type of person who delights in picking on children. Because when you get down to it, when you're like a year one student, the idea is that you're, you know, roughly equivalent to a first grader. You know, in essence, like 6 or 7 years old. Anya's a fair bit younger than that due to some subterfuge on her part, but like, it doesn't take much to be an imposing person to a 6-year-old, you know? And there are just certain types of teachers who just really, really enjoy just horrendous behavior that, like, really shouldn't be allowed. And to be fair, like, some of these kids are, like, breaking rules and all that, but, like, you know, she's pulling out that old line of, like, ignorance of the rules is no excuse. I mean, here we have it, you know, she says she doesn't care about who it is, she just wants to punish someone. Like, I think for, like, legal reasons, I can't say what should be done to teachers like that, but know that it should be done, and it should be done publicly. You know, I'll leave it at that. So it seems like, really she's just looking for an excuse for everyone here to walk away with a demerit. Now, I do find it interesting that such importance is placed on a handkerchief. Like, I get it in a way, like it's an important thing to have, you know, lest, you know, you wipe your wet hands on your pants like that guy, but, you know, this really is one of those just, like, absolutely fake, silly stories that only works on kids who don't know any better. Because, like, if you wipe your hands on the side of your pants, like, no one can credibly accuse you of having peed your pants. And by that same logic, like, who would ever wipe their wet hands on their pants in such a way to make it look as though they peed their pants? Absolutely ridiculous. So the trouble here is that Damien, you know, normally impeccable in his rule following, you know, kinda usually, the poor guy, like, he doesn't have his handkerchief, so, you know, he's on track for an embarrassing demerit. So the trouble is now with Anya, because on the one hand, she likes watching him squirm. He is kind of a jerk after all. But on the other hand, like, she's privy to his internal thoughts, and she also has her own plan to befriend him for the good of Lloyd's mission. So the question is, like, what's Anya gonna do about it? I mean, this is assuming she has her handkerchief at all, but, okay, so we're already seeing things in Damien vision again. You know, there is, a common occurrence in the anime, shall we say. I don't think it's cropped up in the manga too much, but, like, you know, we, the viewing audience, see Anya one way, but when we see Anya from Damien's perspective, you know, we get a little bit extra now and again. And it's like, I mean, you can't blame the kid, but, I think it's a nice little touch. Ooh. Okay, so she just bought the transparent lie that the monogrammed handkerchief with an A on it, obviously the A stands for the A in Damien. I feel like such a wicked demonic teacher wouldn't go for something like that. And despite Anya imagining herself to be prepared, it seems as though she is not. Oh dear. So there you have it, Anya, she sacrificed herself. And I feel like obviously the tears are gonna tug on Damien's heartstrings, but I feel like this is gonna earn her some significant brownie points with him. He's very clearly aware of everything that happened here. Anya essentially, fell on the sword for him. Now, unfortunately, Damien's goodwill here, his rare act of goodwill, is only gonna, make things worse. Anya knows this. Man, I would really like a chapter in which, Yor performs her vocation on that teacher, let's say. That would be nice. Oh dear. So, if nothing else, despite the demerit, it seems that Anya's plan is working, She's made a little bit of progress. Of course, the trouble is, it makes Lloyd's job that much more stressful. The poor guy is prone to being stressed out, what with being effectively the greatest, most important spy in the world. I mean, I think there have been a couple instances of him having, stomach problems, indigestion, and all that. Oh dear. The shark was too much for the poor guy, now he's passed out. So, while the shock of Anya receiving the Tanatra's bolt is just sort of played up for comedic effect, it's actually a bit more than that. The shock was so great that Lloyd is actually having an extended flashback of his childhood growing up. That was kind of a fun thing in the manga at the time, where it's Lloyd passes out and suddenly, we're looking in on his memories here, playing soldier with his friends as a kid. And I guess even back then, he sort of had a predilection for sneaking around and stuff like that, but I guess that really just informs you that he is in the right line of work here. But I do find it very telling that the two sides of this imaginary game of war are in fact the two sides of the previous war, Because I'm given to understand that Ostania and Westalis have been at war several times, and that currently they're in a bit of a Cold War right now, but that Cold War is kind of heating up, Sort of probably in the lead up to the Cuban Missile Crisis, by way of an analog, Okay, yeah, so it seems like things are heating up based off of the news report on the radio. There's all sorts of stuff about protests, and that, the building they're in used to be like an army warehouse. It isn't currently, but, if war were to break out, there's no guarantee that it would not become an army warehouse again. After all, in wartime, you kind of got to do what you need to do, and that other things fall by the wayside. So ostensibly, that little poker game here, we're supposed to learn that Lloyd is skilled in deception. In that he can bluff and, win with the full house when the other guy thought he'd won with three of a kind. It's been a while since I've read this part of the manga, but I think maybe some of it's seeing it in motion here, but it is interesting that Lloyd seemingly does have, the foundations of a skill set that would serve him later in life. And, it also occurred to me, in that little scene where he is pointing the toy gun at the back of the other kid's head, that was kind of like, the very first episode, I believe. He was essentially threatening that guy, saying like, look, I know all this, information about your daughter, and I'm not above killing her, essentially. It was a very similar sort of thing, at least in the way the scene was framed. Oh dear. So it seems like, way back when Lloyd was a bit of a problem child. Or not like a real problem child, but, causing some problems. He wasn't like a perfect, ideal kid. So, it's unfortunate that Lloyd's talking the way he is, because it's one of those things where, like, you don't understand the way things are until you know more, because, like, I guess as a kid, speaking in terms of war and morality, everything's just kind of black and white. Our side is good, the other side is bad, and that's all there is to it. But it turns out in war, in conflict, it's actually very easy for both sides to do very bad things, Like, and, like, sometimes you can do bad things mistakenly. Like, I don't know. Things get very, very gray very, very quickly. And while, maybe it's not necessarily right to say, like, hey, son, you're a coward, you would only hamper the military. Like, I don't think that's exactly a fair accusation to level at, like, a kid who's, like, not even 10 years old, I assume. But, like, I guess there's also the assumption that, like, life isn't exactly great here. Things are clearly, like, moving in the direction of war. But at the same time, like, they're not at war. Lloyd has never known war, so... there's only so much you can be expected to understand, So it's interesting that in the prelude to everything going on, there's a couple sides here. The old-timers know that, like, despite there being treaties and pacts in place, and there haven't been any real big skirmishes lately, that doesn't mean war can't break out. But at the same time, there hasn't been any armed conflict, so, perhaps there will be no war, But, like, on the other hand, like, sometimes you can have a skirmish and then everything cools down, or sometimes full-blown conflict can spring out of nowhere. Sometimes it really only does take one little inciting incident for things to spiral out of control. So once again, Lloyd is sort of demonstrating his predilection for spy work by lying. He's saying, like, look, I'm going to take my studies more seriously. I'm going to, buy a reference book if you give me the money for it. And, like, he isn't going to do that. We already know that, but, Oh, I don't remember this. Is Lloyd having second thoughts? Oh, I guess he was. Well, a shame he didn't actually say anything about it, because it might have been better overall. I mean, at least he has the moral sense to feel guilty about having done this, even if he does ultimately go through it. Or through with it, rather. Yeah, so he bought the toy gun and the helmet and all that. And, man, it's going to be real tough explaining why he has all this stuff and why he doesn't have this, fictional reference book he mentioned. There is also the issue of, it's one thing to play a soldier, but it's another thing to actually be a soldier. Because, there are, like, fitness requirements and standards that need to be upheld, and then there's the business of, like, if you're a soldier, like, you actually have to do things. And a lot of those things are strenuous and dangerous, and, it's, I guess it's a bit of a shock if you've never done anything like that before. And I guess, for someone like Lloyd, he's only a kid. And to be fair, like, kids aren't known for knowing a whole lot about anything. Now, I feel like it's kind of a fool's errand to start asking people, like, am I cut out to be a soldier? Like, the answer is no. By virtue of being a kid, like, no, you're not fit to be a soldier. Like, maybe grow up first. But I don't know. Like, it's kind of difficult, And at least Lloyd is sort of learning that maybe, like, the Estanians aren't all, demons as the propaganda makes them out to be. At least the lady here doing the cooking, like, she says, look, it's better to hold, like, tasty food and eat that than it would be to hold a gun and be forced to shoot at someone or be shot yourself, And, true enough. So, it seems like Lloyd's guilt has gotten the better of him. He wants to return his father's money, and he wants to work at the shop to earn that money. But, unfortunately, it seems like, whatever that inciting incident was, it happened off screen, and now he's never going to get the chance. Not because he's dead, but because, like, the war has started. I don't know if that was a bomb or a mortar or an artillery shell or what, but, life as it was is over. The army's crossing the border. Like, things are gonna hit the fan, in rather short order. It is kind of unfortunate that Lloyd's first experience with war is, being bombed in this manner. I mean, granted, we know he's lucky he didn't die, but, it is grim business overall. Even just being pelted by rubble as he was. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.